All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Wednesday. It's Hump Day. I always kind of get excited about Hump Day a little bit. I'm also just going to be sharing this on the Halitics Facebook page. You can certainly watch us, of course. And I actually urge you to, if you have a choice of platforms, to use the YouTube platform, because I want to get my subscriptions and my views up there. That's kind of the center piece, if you will, the preferred platform for me. But obviously, I just want you to watch. That's the most important thing, of course, more important by far than where. And also, I'd love it if you call in 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. I did speak to a friend of Halitics, Kirsten, earlier, or I didn't speak to her. I texted her earlier this morning, messaged her, and she may weigh in because we're going to talk about the environment. That's going to be a main focus of today's program. And as you know, if you've been following me at all, and I hope you will, I hope you do, the two topics that really consume me, certainly in terms of even my mind, rather as opposed to even the amount of time I spend talking to you, is the genocide in Gaza and the ecocide on our planet. The fact that human activity is directly causing the sixth great extinction, I think it is on record. And we call this now, of course, the Anthropocene age. It's the age of man, the Anthropocene, because humans, unlike any other species ever in the history of our planet, in the history of our biosphere since life first emerged, and we don't even know how long ago, maybe over 1 billion years ago, there were life forms on the planet. Seems like the current efflorescence of life, the explosion of life, obviously the number of species contracting now because of human activity very rapidly, but the efflorescence of life as we see it now maybe began, I think, and I'm not a biologist and I'm not a paleontologist, but my understanding is maybe 500 million years ago, the ancestors of all life on the planet began to emerge in the oceans. So we're basically wiping out 500 million years of evolution. That's what humanity is doing, and it's so awful. It's so horrific. And, this is not like a diatribe or anything against humanity or against humans. I mean, we've been also responsible for some of the most beautiful and extraordinary achievements. Obviously, no other species has achieved what we have in every area, right? Intellectually, for sure, physically building things, but the cost is even more extraordinary. It's so tragic. And it doesn't have to be this way. We can use those giant brains we have to stop ourselves before we kill everything. But it doesn't look like we're getting there. It doesn't look like we're doing that. What kind of suggested today's program was an email I got from Maryland Peace Action. Hat tip Susan, who's an incredible activist. I got to get her on this program. I don't think I've invited her, so I can't say, she won't come on, because I have never invited her. I've got to get Susan on, but she is focused, like me, on the plight of the Palestinian people, and particularly the Gazans. But also, she shared with me an article, and we'll play video from the article. Actually, is kind of a transcript from Fox Baltimore about our governor, Wes Moore, a Democrat, often hailed, often claimed to be the future of the Democratic Party, young, attractive, very, very speaks extremely well, wealthy. So, is he an author? Is he the future of the party? Of course, the question is never asked, what are his policies? Are they better for working people? Can he rally folks to his side? And that's really the question Democrats have to ask. And I would say the answer would be absolutely not. So the article from Fox Baltimore actually, the trend in it, or the I guess the theme, is that clean green energy is bad. Wind energy is bad. I totally disagree with that theme. But the facts that they adduce certainly paint a very, very dark indictment against the kind of government actions that Democrats have taken, the incentives that Democrats have pushed during the Biden administration before to promote clean, green energy. They have done it in exactly the wrong way, in a way that is counterproductive, that has been wasteful. The conclusion by Fox is we shouldn't even promote clean, green energy. We should just let the market decide. And the answer is we should let the market decide, as long as we force the market to account for the extraordinary costs that fossil fuels impose. And of course, the cost ultimately is the extinction of probably a majority of life forms on this planet. 240-242-5646, certainly an incalculable reduction in life quality for humans and for most life forms, or certainly advanced life forms, trees. I mean, not even just mammals, not just animals with brains. I guess all animals have brains of some sort, maybe not, but nervous systems, but also plants that we revere, that we have, that humans in the past have actually worshipped, have honored. Okay, if you want to join me, 240-242-5646, we'd love to talk to you. Our planet is dying, and I've said this you can go back. I mean, you can't go back because I took halginsberg.com offline a while ago. It wasn't worth my keeping it going, but I have some old pieces there which I have actually talking about why a fossil fuels tax makes so much more sense than any other way, and would be the most efficient. Not just more sense, it's the only thing that'll work. It's really the only way that we can consistently reduce our consumption of carbon to a point where we can actually stop the ecocide. All right, Gaza death toll near 57,700 as Israeli attacks continue unabated. I saw a couple of headlines saying there were 40 deaths in Gaza, and this is how bad it is. I'm like, oh wow, good, only 40. No, over 100. There were 40 in airstrikes that were reported by certain American media, and I think Al Jazeera. But Anadolu Ajansi's consistently complete as it can be. And their report is with 57,680 total Palestinians killed since the reprisals by Israel, the response, the murderous response, the rampage that Israel launched in reaction to October 7, really just their pretext, right? Their pretext to go full bore genocide against Palestine. 57,680 now killed, and that's 105 since yesterday, past 24 hours. Just absolutely awful. I mean, there's no words really. I mean, they fail. But even though language really doesn't provide us with sufficient understanding, even photos don't. I mean, you have to live through this nightmare and die in this nightmare to have any kind of understanding of it, if you could even then. But even though words are not sufficient, language has its limitations. We still must talk about it. 57,680. By the way, not just now. I've been accused. People have said, oh, you don't care about Israel. You just care about Gaza. You don't center the suffering of the Israeli people. And yeah, because they have the power. They are the ones who have made the decision. And I understand, governments do things without the consent of the people. Certainly the United States is. Certainly Donald Trump is doing all sorts of horrible things that most Americans don't want him to do. So I can't just say, oh, I'm indifferent to the lives of the Israelis, but it doesn't feel the same. This is the state with the power. They ultimately did vote for Netanyahu. At least a plurality voted for his party. And, that has led us to where we are now. And the same goes for Trump. And, I could make excuses and say, well, it's not all you can't just blame Trump voters because the alternative was as bad or almost as bad. And yeah, that's true. But how is that an excuse? I mean, the fact that the Democrats put up someone just as bad as Trump hardly excuses the American people for what Trump is doing. So, yeah, I guess I have to take some blame myself. I've done what I could to try to stop our government from the terrible crimes it's committing and has been committing, right, for decades, generations. Centuries, right? I mean, but, so I would hate to die. I don't want to feel like I deserve it. But, in the end, you have to look at what a country is doing and say, well, the people who live in that country, if that country is a powerful, imperialist, cruel nation that is hurting others deliberately out of greed or fear or selfishness, bigotry, religious supremacy, it's harder for me to feel the same sympathy for its victims. It's just that simple. But there were Israelis who died yesterday, according to Al Jazeera. This is reported yesterday, so maybe it's hard to know because of the time differences and all that. But either Tuesday or Monday, 5 Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza as pressure mounts for ceasefire. And you have close to 1,000 Israelis now, soldiers killed. Obviously it pales compared to the number of Palestinians that they've killed, but their lives, they're dead. It would be so much better if they hadn't ever been sent to kill Gazans. And, Al Jazeera talks about the pressure for ceasefire. And we hear this. And maybe it's true. I'm not saying there isn't a lot of pressure. Maybe Trump, because Trump is meeting with Netanyahu. I'll believe it when I see it. We've heard this over and over. We heard last year AOC saying that Kamala is working tirelessly for a ceasefire. It was complete nonsense. It was a complete lie. Maybe there is pressure, but until it happens, I'll believe it. And then I won't until it doesn't happen. Until it happens, I won't believe it's going to happen. When it does, I will. But I'm not going to get my hopes up for that. 240-242-5646. We're going to get to the climate crisis discussion in just a moment. Also want to respond, or at least return briefly to the debate, I guess, Arlen and I had yesterday about whether, in fact, Democrats and even progressive Democrats like AOC are providing any vision for a better country than what we have now. Since October 7th, Israel and the U.S. have killed a minimum of 57,680 Gazans, including 105 people yesterday, Tuesday. And from March 18th through today, they've killed Trump and Netanyahu. That is over 7,000 Gazans. We have 7,121. Those are the official numbers from the health ministry. But, of course, the number is much, much higher. And that includes 3,500 women and children. Before I get really just a couple of, was that? Yeah, we won't talk about AOC yet. We'll get to that. But before we get to the conversation about the failing, apparently clean green energy project for offshore winds in Maryland, I just want to note that I read this, I can't remember who was making this comment about the New York Times and how the New York Times, when you read it, you have to understand that there's a tremendous exercise of hasbara, of Israeli propaganda in it. Just the words that they choose. Now, they maintain plausible deniability because they do actually discuss sometimes the cruelty of the Israeli government, the crimes of the Israeli government. They don't completely ignore it. They don't pretend it's not happening at all. And this gives them, though, a little bit of leeway, right? People say, well, it's the New York Times and they're talking about it. And so the New York Times isn't pretending there's no killing. So therefore, the language that they use is fair, right? That's the kind of the takeaway that many, I would say, liberal Jews and liberal Zionists take away. Well, the New York Times, yeah, sometimes they're shading things a little bit pro-Israel. But on the other hand, they did tell us about how the Israeli military is shooting children in the head. and the chest deliberately. They did tell us, that there hasn't been any proof that there were Hamas tunnels under the hospitals that Israel's been blowing up. So, we can take it when the New York Times is telling us that Hamas is standing in the way of a ceasefire. Israel really wants peace. We can believe that. When the New York Times throws shade, right? Because this is something the New York Times does that's very, very upsetting, is they throw shade on the casualty and death counts. They always ascribe the number to what they call the Hamas-controlled Palestinian Health Ministry, as though we're supposed to, maybe those numbers aren't accurate. Maybe they're not true. When they tell us there's 105 more bodies, maybe we shouldn't believe it. Because it's only the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry, when in fact, independent observers and history has completely shown that these are reputable sources, that they are accurate, that they are credible, that they are not overstating the death count. Moreover, the New York Times has never identified an alternative number, and neither does even the Israeli government. They're not even saying, oh, those numbers are exaggerated. The only thing they'll do is say, well, the percentage of the people that we've killed include a lot of Hamas militants. Okay, yeah. So that's okay too. If they are soldiers, if they're trying to fight against your illegal occupation, against the ongoing murder of women and children, if they're fighting against you, that's okay for you to kill them, instead of maybe you saying, we should get the hell out of there and stop it. But obviously the numbers that Israel presents are wildly inflated when it comes to the number of militants that they're killing. All right, again, 240-242-5646. Don't forget, I don't know, did I show my subscribe? I think I did show it, but again, I'll do it. Why not again? Please do subscribe now if you haven't already done so. I would love to see that number rise. You can also always join the conversation on Facebook at Halitics, in the Halitics group. A lot of ferment there, a lot of conversation, a lot going on. And we just want to see that number continue to rise as well. Would be awesome. We're providing something here, I think, that most people really don't get. Most podcasters, YouTubers, whatever you want to call us. I'm not aware of others who do this, honestly, who have the calls, who take the calls, and are focused as to the extent that I'm, not just on how bad the Republicans are, which we often kind of leave a little bit to the side because it's just an understood, right? It's understood that they're corrupt. It's understood that they're bought and paid for. It's understood that they represent the billionaire class. What we try to do here is also expose the Democrats for their perfidy, for their cupidity, for their corruption, and present, though, beyond that, and I just don't think you see this. You certainly don't see this in, I guess, maybe what you call, I don't know, people who are sort of on the same wavelength as I am in certain areas, like maybe Jimmy Dore, maybe the due distance bros to a greater degree than Dore, who's a climate crisis denier. I provide solutions. I provide answers. I talk, and I want to hear from you what you think are the right answers. So that's a little different than the other hosts. I give Brianna Joy Gray a lot of credit. She does talk about solutions. I've never heard her once. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this. I've never once heard her talk about the climate catastrophe. So that's an area where she's been remiss. And she's not the only one. Liberals, progressives, whatever you want to call us, are often very loath to discuss this. And I think they feel that they're going to turn people off, that people don't want to hear it. There's a certain element, we've seen this with the Dore audience, of people who are conspiracy believers, and they who follow some of the alternative YouTubers, alternative podcasters, those who are very critical of the Democratic Party, but also aren't supportive of Republicans. There's definitely an element of conspiracy people, and they are of the mindset that somehow they're, all the temperature records are false, that there's a hoax, this isn't really happening. I don't know what you do with such people. It's very, very challenging. It's very difficult. Okay, so in Maryland, which is a true blue state, the trifecta is in place here with a Maryland governor, and the legislature is veto-proof Democratic. So you'd think if there was a ground zero for clean green energy, it would be Maryland. Also, because we're not a oil-producing state, we may have some coal mines in Western Maryland. I guess we do, but they become less and less a critical factor in our economy. So one would think that clean green energy would have a real foothold in Maryland. And it appeared to be that way. Let's listen to a little bit from Governor Moore, Wes Moore. This is just in the past few days from Fox 45 News.
% green energy goals 10 years before the previously planned target.
The Power Act will nearly quadruple our offshore wind goals so that we can build off of the great work of our partners at Trade Point Atlantic, our partners at Ørsted, our partners at U.S. Wind, to make Maryland the offshore capital of the United States.
Our team set out to evaluate whether Governor Moore and the state...
I'm going to stop there for just one quick second. It seems like a very worthy goal, right? To have Maryland, we have a very long shoreline. There's a lot of wind out there. You see those big turbines spinning, and you think, well, that's good. That's creating energy. You see those on ridges a lot of times in western Pennsylvania. I see a lot of the windmills, California. Why not have them in Maryland? It makes a lot of sense to have the offshore wind turbines. And so Moore announces this Power Act, which was a Maryland kind of a Green New Deal type program. The Green New Deal was never explicitly approved by Congress, but there was money earmarked for green projects, and these include tax credits, grant money, and other direct incentives and subsidies to producers of clean green energy. So what would that be? Obviously wind, solar, you get it, geothermal, depending on where you are. And you could apply for that money. States could dole it out to whoever they wanted. Sounds good in principle. Obviously, there's, as you can all imagine, quite a lot of room for corruption, backroom deals. You contribute to my campaign for governor, I'm going to make sure you're at the top of the list of the green energy companies that I'm going to give money to. So that kind of thing is what you worry about when governments have pots of money to give away to companies, right? Not pots of money to give to poor people, to indigents, to renters, to, folks where you say, okay, well, here's $1,000. It's much harder to see corruption in a program where money is being spent in a broad-based way to lots of individuals being given to them. That's harder and not enormous sums, right? Let's say you give $1,000 rent subsidy to $100,000 renters, right? 100,000 renters, you give $1,000 a month to, so that they can stay in their apartments. So that's a good amount of money. I do the math. 100,000 times 1,000 would be, I guess, I don't know, $1 billion, some big amount. It's a lot of money. I'm not saying it isn't. It's a lot of money, $12 billion a year. So, but is it worth it to keep people in their apartments? Probably it is. I think I overstated that. 100,000 times 1,000 would be 10 million. So I don't know. We can't do it right now. This is terrible. You put 3 more zeros after 100,000, right? 100,000, 3 more zeros is 100 million. So 12 billion. That's 1,000, right? Exactly. So it's a lot of money. Not saying it isn't, but is it worth it so that people can stay in their homes? I would say probably it is. And it's much harder to see how that would be gamed. If you give that money to housing developers, if you give that money to people who build, then yes, then obviously there's extraordinary opportunities for corruption, for graft. But if you're just giving it to a large number of people, then you see much less of it. In this case, rather than just saying to people, hey, you want to continue using fossil fuels, you're going to have to pay more, because when you burn gasoline, when power plants burn coal to make electricity, you're destroying our world. You're destroying our mother. You're burning it up. We're already suffering through. We just saw in Texas over 100 people died due to floods, which are almost certainly secondary to human-caused global warming. So when you burn fossil fuels, you hurt us. Therefore, you have to pay for that. That's one way to generate more clean, green energy. You make alternatives to fossil fuels relatively less expensive. Another way is the government picks winners and losers. Well, we're going to give a contract to this company. We're going to give them $1 billion to build a giant facility off the Maryland shore to produce wind. But that leads to all sorts of problems. Can they really do it? Are they really committed to the project? And you can hear from this video exactly why this has failed so far.
Fulfilled their promise to create more than 550 steelworker jobs at the Trade Point Atlantic site leased by U.S. Wind by 2025.
There is no time to wait for Maryland to get moving.
We took a look at Google Earth images of the site from 2017 when U.S. Wind was first granted approval by the state to build its wind turbine project. Images taken in August 2023, about 4 months after Moore announced the new wind turbine facility. Little change is seen. Nearly a year and a half later, images were nearly identical.
U.S.
All right, so you can see that they haven't moved. There's no progress made on that project. And the reason, apparently, as far as I can glean, is that no matter how many tax credits or benefits the state gives, the federal government gives to offshore wind energy producers, they still won't be able to price the electricity that's generated by those giant windmills. They still won't be able to price that electricity at a competitive rate. It's just cheaper. It just costs less to burn coal, to burn natural gas. Those are less expensive forms of energy. So that's why it's not happening. I mean, this doesn't really, it seems so obvious, even it seemed obvious in the moment to me. This isn't how you create demand for clean, green energy. You don't give subsidies to the producers. You make the alternative more expensive. And especially the great benefit of doing that, of making the alternative energy generated by fossil fuels more expensive. The great benefit from doing that is that even if we don't use wind energy, people will still conserve. People will still use less because the cost of the fossil fuel goes up. So that what do? You start carpooling. You walk. You take public transit. You make one trip instead of two. You bicycle. You live closer to your place of work. You live closer to the stores where you shop. You do everything possible to consume less because the cost of that energy, whether it's electricity to power your vehicle or it's gasoline in your car, you do everything to keep that cost down because there's an artificial added cost to it. Now, I understand. People say to me over and over, well, that's not fair to poor people. They're going to have to pay the brunt of it. Yes, you give them money back. You say, okay, well, here's $1,000 a month. We understand the cost of energy just went up $1,000. Here's $1,000 a month. But what people will do with that money is they're not going to go around and turn around and say, I'm going to buy more electricity. At first they'll have to buy some gasoline with it, but they're going to say that is so expensive. I want to use that money to pay for food. I want to use that money to pay for rent. I'm going to use that money to get a much more efficient car. So I won't be spending so much money every month for electricity. But when you give a giant subsidy to an offshore wind company, you're not doing anything to reduce demand for gasoline. You're not doing anything unless or until that energy, that wind comes online and starts to compete with the coal and the natural gas powered generated electricity. But even then, you're not going to reduce it unless you're not going to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels unless the wind is indeed cheaper, produces cheaper electricity, which it doesn't. It just doesn't, not in the current environment. This is the exact same argument, by the way, dynamic for taxing, for tariffs. Because when you impose a tariff on an import, you're taking away the extraordinary cost advantage that the producer has by exploiting cheap labor. When you impose a fossil fuels tax, you're taking away the extraordinary advantage that the fossil fuel companies have from the concentrated energy sources that coal and natural gas and petroleum are, the extraordinary advantages that they have from that, and also from the fact that a lot of the costs of those energies are external, right? They're the CO2 emissions, they're pollution. So, there's the slag, the polluted lakes and water and waterways that result. No jobs yet. 550 steelworker jobs, none. Now, if there had been a fossil fuels tax, let's say there had been a fossil fuels tax that was kept going and getting higher and higher and more every single year. Well, guess what? Producers of alternative energy sources, clean green energy, would say to themselves, look at how expensive gasoline is. Look at how expensive natural gas is. Those power plants, those auto drivers are going to be looking for desperate for something else to power their plant and vehicle. So we're seeing already the sales of electric cars go up, but electricity is very expensive too because of the cost of purchasing coal and natural gas for the power plant because there's a tax on it. We can supply those power plants electricity at a much lower price that we generate through wind, through solar. Now, I don't know if wind is the best solution. Offshore may not be. Offshore wind is apparently very expensive compared to solar, compared to onshore wind. But you let the market decide. You don't have the government. You don't have this Governor Moore who, what the hell, he doesn't know from electric, wind versus solar versus geothermal. He doesn't know what the best solution is, but the market will choose winners and losers. Somebody starts to build an offshore wind plant, and they realize, hey, you know what? There just isn't enough wind. It's not going to work. But in the end, there will be solutions that will come online, and they will employ those steel workers that we just talked about. They will employ other Marylanders or New Yorkers, if New York, whatever state. So obviously, it just is so clear that a tax on the bad, the fossil fuels, is the only solution, the only answer. But getting people to understand, it's very, very challenging. Would love to hear your thoughts. Please, 240-242-5646. We did have a caller scheduled. Let's see, she's not able to, which is, of course, but she did say, this is Kirsten. I agree with you on taxing fossil fuels. Though once we internalize the externalities of green energy production, those taxes might be even higher. Absolutely. I would just keep raising the tax. There's no limit. Raise it to the point where we just stop consuming fossil fuels altogether. Here's more from Fox on the flailing Maryland Eastern Shore offshore wind plant that is not happening.
Including a $47 million federal grant awarded by the Biden administration to develop the location to Maryland federal partner, Congressman Andy Harris.
So just before we hear from Harris, Harris is a right-winger. Harris is a MAGA. I don't trust Harris. He makes some points here we're going to examine in a moment. But what's important to understand, again, is it's a grant. So the grant money is going to the state, which is going to the producer. What a terrible, terrible solution to the problem. Because you're totally then in the dependent on this one company. And if they don't do what you want them to do, yeah, you can sue them. You can try to claw the money back. They might go bankrupt. You're stuck. You're out that $47 million. What if you decided, no, we're going to raise the price of fossil fuels. We're going to impose a tax on the producers or not even on the consumers. You're not at 47 million. You just got all this money into your coffers. Every time someone fills up their vehicle, they got to pay that tax. Every time a power plant takes a delivery of coal to burn, so that they can generate the steam necessary to create the electricity. Every time a power plant takes in that coal, they got to pay a tax. Now the government, us, has money, lots and lots of money that we can use to help people pay for those increased energy costs. Now, you don't pay them based on their consumption. You don't reward increased consumption. You just pay the money out to everyone. And they'll have the money, A, to pay for the increased costs in electricity, and they'll also have the money to start transitioning to clean green energy, which isn't subject to the tax. I've talked about this many times. There's nothing that is honestly more dear to my heart, and it's a solution that for some reason, it is not it is the solution. Even economists rarely discuss this. And when they do, they don't talk about it in the kind of terms I do, which is, hey, dollars, we're not talking about 50 cents a gallon. We're talking about $5 a gallon. We're talking about $20 a gallon. This is the one way we can preserve what's left of the beauties on our planet.
Look, this is not an American company. It's an Italian company. Cleverly put U.S. Wind, put U.S. in their American subsidiary's name. And I don't think they care about the United States. All they care about is they care about those tax credits.
Sure.
All right. So, you know what? Look, $47,000 grant tax credits. I can't argue with what Harris just said there. That was the incentive. They don't care about America. Now, that's true for American companies too, right? There's lots of short timers and crooks in American businesses too. And they would also be looking to game the system, looking to try to come up with any way to get a tax benefit or to get a giant grant and then not deliver, which is what we're seeing here in Maryland. That's why it makes so little sense to try to subsidize these kinds of energies. The real solution is you just tax the bad. You tax the fossil fuels. Then entrepreneurs who are serious about and who have the capabilities to generate clean green energy will move in because there will be profits to be made. And if you don't do it, if you flim-flam people, well, who are you flim-flamming? Your investors. You might go to an investor and say, man, look at the price of gas. Do you notice how much it costs to fill your tank of gas? It's $20 a gallon. It's $20 a gallon now. So there's huge opportunities for us in clean green energy. And I've got this solution. I've got this perpetual motion machine. And boy, once we get this thing going, we're going to be making so much money. It's like printing money. It's a license to print money. So you say that to people and maybe you flim-flam them. But those are private investors. Those are millionaires who are looking for some place to make a big score. It's not the taxpayer. So again, every argument for for ways to generate demand for clean green energy and production of clean green energy and to disincentivize fossil fuel consumption, every argument militates in favor of a tax. Why this isn't understood is beyond me. Here's what, it is look, I wasn't an econ major. I thought about it, but then you had to do math and I guess I didn't have to do math, but everyone does math, econ, and I don't know, whatever. I want to get into it. Math was hard. I mean, I probably could have done it, but it would have been hard. And I sort of regret, I kind of think maybe I should have gone into economics. I love economics. So here's what Andy Harris had to say. People's energy bills are sky high, and offshore wind is one of the most expensive ways to generate electricity. This is just a fool's errand. It was started for totally political purposes. It's a foolish waste of money. So I don't think it's foolish to try to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels. I disagree with that. I don't think it was even started for totally political purposes. There was a good motives. We want to stop burning our planet up. But because of the capture of Washington by corporatists, because of the neoliberal ascendancy, the idea that we would use taxes to disincentivize consumption, which, by the way, economists do recognize is the smartest, most efficient way, that wasn't going to happen. Because neoliberalism at its heart is protecting and enhancing corporate profits. It's not about, in the end, it's ultimately not about using companies to solve problems. That's what a lot of people say. Well, so neoliberalism is when you see poor people, you hire companies to solve the problem. It's really ultimately not even about that. What it's about is empowering and enriching companies. And that's what happens with, say, Obamacare, right? Because there's all these new clients. But there are some times when private companies are the solution. But the neoliberal ideology would be, we want to unleash the market by giving money to private companies, right? So the neoliberal solution is not, hey, the market will pick and choose winners. So if we raise the tax of gasoline and coal and natural gas to reflect the costs that they impose on society, if we raise the price, then there will be a vacuum. There will be profits to be made by private industry, private companies that produce clean, green energy. So that's not neoliberal. Neoliberal is, that would just be liberal, actually, to a significant degree. Neoliberal is, let's pay companies to solve our problem. Not let's tax the companies that are causing the problem. Let's pay companies to solve our problem. Terrible. If you're not going to tax the bad actors, the problem creators, the ExxonMobils, if you're not going to tax their product, then the government needs to take it over. No, don't pay companies that will drop their projects in a heartbeat if they don't see the return on investment that they were hoping for. Don't pay them. Do it yourself. Build your own wind turbines. Build your own, arrays of solar generators, solar panels. Build your own. That would be better. Anything would be better than paying short timers and profiteers. So Harris says offshore wind is one of the most expensive ways to generate electricity. This is just a fool's errand. It was started. Okay, I want to examine that because I don't trust Harris. He's a liar. The fact is, he's right. As currently we price energy, offshore wind is very expensive. And I went to this Windustry publication called ATO to, I Googled and I came up with this. And I thought it was very, very interesting what they said. Again, Windustry. So you'd think Windustry would be very pro-wind energy and they wouldn't buy into propaganda that's criticizing the industry if it's indeed propaganda. But ATO says, no, it's true. There are real benefits from wind power, but those benefits aren't priced into it. So therefore, wind power, especially offshore, we'll get to that, is relatively more expensive to consume and to produce, and therefore to consume, because they have to price, the cost of production drives to a significant degree, not completely, but to a significant degree drives the cost of the cost per kilowatt hour of the energy. So they point out that one of the really good things about wind, and I don't know if this was true, but apparently it is, at least off the coast, and this is a European journal, but apparently offshore wind is pretty darn reliable. It just keeps blowing, it doesn't stop. And maybe that has to do with the tides. It has to do with, the night and day temperature changes that result from hot days and cold nights, whatever. Cold water, hot air, you get wind. So what they're saying is there's always the wind. And so you basically just get that wind day after day. It's very consistent. There isn't a boom and bust cycle like with, oil. When a new oil field is discovered, suddenly there's a giant glut of petroleum and the price craters, the price crashes. And that's costly. Just the volatility is costly to the fossil fuel industry. So what they're saying is no, you get very consistent amount of kilowatts from wind. You know what it's going to be. You can predict it, and that provides a real benefit. It reduces risk. You know you're going to get that wind every night. But when you drill an oil well, you don't know if there's going to be oil, and if there is, you don't know how much there's going to be. So there's a lot of risk involved. And they're saying that the risk reduction isn't accounted for by standard methods for calculating the cost of energy. So in other words, wind is more expensive to consumers than it really should be because they're not factoring in that there aren't changes. There are they're going to get a consistent source. They don't do that. What consumers of energy have tended to do, what their accountants have tended to do, is look very short term. Okay, well, this quarter, if we buy this amount of petroleum from ExxonMobil or what have you, Shell, this is how much it's going to cost us. Whereas if we buy from Windustry, it's going to cost us more to generate the same amount of electricity from that energy. So we pay more to Windustry. But what they're not calculating is that for the next 10 years, they're going to get the same amount from Windustry, whereas they buy from ExxonMobil or Shell this quarter, next quarter, the price could skyrocket. And that's going to add, to their total cost of operation, TCO, and reduce their ROI. What Windustry is saying, and I think it makes perfect sense, is they're not factoring in that the uncertainty is costing them money. They point out what I have always considered to be the real reason that fossil fuel energy is so cheap compared to other forms of energy. It's cheaper for power companies to dump waste in the form of the ashes from coal. There's CO2, which is, the carbon dioxide that they pump into the atmosphere, nitrous oxides, and also that we pump into the atmosphere when we burn gasoline in our cars. Nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, and methane for free. They basically just offload the costs of burning fossil fuels on us. Creates enormous costs to others. Now, how do you address that? What's the best way to address that? Well, obviously, it's a tax. You're imposing huge costs on us when you burn those products, including when you personally, when I'm talking to you individually, you go out and you drive your car. You're actually imposing costs on the rest of us. So you should have to pay extra for that, not just the cost of the gasoline, but all the additional costs. That's why you have a tax. That's why a tax is the most efficient solution by far. Because even if we put online those wind generators, those wind electricity generators, even if we do that, the cost of gasoline is still going to be cheap. It's not going to make the cost of gasoline more expensive. If anything, it will cause the price of gasoline to drop because the oil companies are going to now have to compete with another form of energy. That's not going to solve our problem. Only by making that fossil fuel, that world destroyer, cost prohibitive can we solve the problem. And again, if you want, if you want, as I certainly do, to make sure we protect poor, struggling, working people from massive cost energy hikes, you got to return that money, the taxed money to people. And if you want to just, and I always took the position it should be just returned to everybody. So if there's 300 million Americans and the tax raises 900 million every month, so everybody would raise probably a lot more than that. But let's say it was just to make it really easy. There's 300 million Americans. Every month, 900 million is raised, so you send a check for $3 every American. It'd probably be more like $300. And by the way, that would also go to help pay for, higher housing costs and everything else. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. And I haven't been checking my comments. Just wanted to let you know that Kirsten couldn't make it, but we'll try to get her another time. Totally understood, of course. Totally get it. And good to see Ari in the chat. Great to see you there, Ari. So just to move on a little bit, I was going to talk about my issues with AOC, but let's just have maybe a little bit of fun. This was a trivia question my son asked me the other day, and then my other son and I were thinking about this and trying to come up with it. And so this came online a few days ago on Instagram, and I thought this was a really interesting question. The question, what colleges have generated both a Super Bowl winning starting quarterback? So that's be a quarterback of a team that wins the Super Bowl and who starts the Super Bowl that they win. So schools that have graduated from them or who played for them, a quarterback who won a Super Bowl starting, and a president. And I will say proudly, I got 4. I got the first 4 at the top: Michigan, Miami of Ohio, Navy, Stanford. I did not know, though, that the president who graduated from Miami of Ohio was Benjamin Harrison. I thought a little bit about Ohio State, but I couldn't think of an Ohio State quarterback who won the Super Bowl. And I couldn't even think of an Ohio State president. So I did guess Miami of Ohio, thinking of Big Ben Roethlisberger. And it turns out that is the answer. I had no idea it was Harrison. I did get Michigan. Obviously, that was the easiest one with Tom Brady and Gerald Ford. I did get, like I mentioned, Miami of Ohio. Didn't get Harrison. Navy, absolutely got Staubach and Carter. Stanford, I got Plunkett and Hoover. I didn't think of Elway. I would have if I'd had to. I did not get Delaware. I could not think of Delaware. Not anybody's first thought when you think of a football power. But yeah, Joe Flacco, Baltimore Ravens starting quarterback when they won the Super Bowl recently, did go to Delaware. So very interesting, obviously, Joe Biden. So interesting question. I thought of Princeton. I did not guess Princeton because Woodrow Wilson was a Princeton man, and so is Jason Garrett, former coach of the Dallas Cowboys and former quarterback, and also a starting quarterback a few games for the Dallas Cowboys, but he did not start. He does have rings, did not start any of the Super Bowls that they won in the 90s. So even though he was on the team, I believe for all 3 of them, he did not start. I don't think he even played in any of them. So you had to start. But Princeton's the only school I can even think of besides these 5 where they have a quarterback who was on a Super Bowl winning team. I don't think Harvard, Ryan or Fitzpatrick, I don't think was on a Super Bowl winning team. Maybe I'm wrong about that. He might have been on one of the Brady team that won in Tampa Bay. Anyway, the reason I bring this up, why this sort of became interesting to me, is there was a question, because it's interesting to me anyway, because trivia is always interesting to me. But there was a question, which is the best, right? Which of those duos or trio in the case of Plunkett, Elway, and Hoover, which is the best, right? If you add, you aggregate the quality of the quarterback and the quality of the president, which was the best? So before I tell you, you'll see my answer because I put it there. But and I thought about this question because one person wrote Michigan got the best duo, so that would be obviously Ford and Brady. So my response is yes, Ford, but Ford was a meh president. I don't think he was the worst president. I believe Ford did get us out of Vietnam, right? So I give him some credit for that. Of course, he pardoned Nixon. I don't think that was the worst. I know that people hate that he pardoned Nixon, but that doesn't break my heart. As bad as Watergate was, Do we need to go through all of that? The country was kind of at a standstill. I don't remember it that well, but that we were all riveted to our TVs, the testimony of John Dean and all the prosecutorial fireworks on display. I don't know if we needed to go through that. I think Ford made a point. It was time to move on. I don't think he was necessarily wrong. Look, his response to inflation, whip inflation now, not really very useful. So I'd say he was a MAP president. Brady is the GOAT. Are they the best of the choices? And I actually said no. I'm going with Carter and Roger Staubach. I think Staubach, I remember him from my youth. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating how good he was. He was a great, great player, great, great quarterback. And I think Jimmy Carter was one of the better presidents. He was a really good president. So not a great president. Some have argued that he began in earnest the Democratic move towards neoliberalism. And maybe that's fair. Maybe that is truly fair. And so maybe I'm rating him too high. On the other hand, I do give him credit for Camp David, which was a great achievement. So I'll put Carter and Staubach as the best president quarterback duo or trio to win both a Super Bowl and a presidency from the same university. I definitely would do that. I would put them first. I would note that the other choices are just roundly bad. I mean, really, they're just bad. You look at, let's just go through it real quick. Except for, I don't know, Harrison. Benjamin Harrison, as far as I know, is a pretty nondescript president. I really don't know anything about him. Roethlisberger was an okay quarterback. He was a bad, at least in college, he was known for really very, very bad treatment of girls and women at his university. I think he kind of stopped that when after he moved to the NFL. There were no stories like that about him, so maybe he cleaned up his act a little bit, but it's still terrible. He was still a molester when he was in college. I don't know if that factors into this. We're really looking at the best football players and the best presidents. Benjamin Harrison, as far as I know, was part of was he part of the Tammany Hall? I'm not certain about that. I don't think he was a very good president, as far as I know. Was he the guy who there was a brokered? There was Samuel Tilden from Florida, and they put Harrison on. I'm not sure if that's the right. Was that 1880? I'm not really certain about that. I just not familiar with my presidential history from the 19th century as I should be. So I don't know. Maybe I'm understating Harrison somehow. I mentioned Staubach, Carter. I think Jimmy Carter was on balance a pretty darn good president. Of course, the competition is pretty weak. Stanford, Plunkett, Elway. Elway was a great quarterback, Plunkett less so. Hoover was a very bad president, right? He oversaw, and I don't even say it's because he was the president when the stock market crashed, but he aggravated it. He refused to provide government assistance. I think his answer was liquidate the bank. Right? Was it liquidate the banks? Liquidate the farmer. He sicked the military on the bonus army marchers. He was completely overmatched by the Depression, the crash and the Depression. He made things worse. So no. And then Biden, Flacco. Yeah, Flacco was not a very good quarterback, and Biden was not a very good president, or worse than that. So yeah, clearly the two teams that are best here are the Navy duo of Staubach and Carter, and then the Michigan two of Brady, Ford. You could give bonus points to Brady, Ford if you want to nudge them ahead. I would note Ford was also an NFL player, so I guess you want to. I mean, he was a Michigan player. I think he won a national championship at Michigan, and I believe he also played in the NFL. Not certain about that, but I'm going to look it up right now. I believe he was All-American. He was All-American. He did not. He did not play in the NFL, although he was offered. He could have. Both the Lions and the Packers said, hey, we'd love you to play for us. And instead he decided, and I can't say he was wrong, to go to Yale Law School. So yeah, if you want to give it to, I don't have a huge problem with that. All right, 240-242-5646, just about the end of the program. I just want to reiterate again. Look, if you want, we are in dire circumstance. I know people don't want to hear this. You want like one of the what I've noticed, YouTube videos, YouTubers who seem to do well are it's not always about ideas, right? It's about mocking people. It's about attacking them. It's about criticizing them, whether from the left or the right. So YouTubers like, I can't remember that Democratic guy, man. He's always wearing a suit. He wears a very fitted suit and he stands up and he addresses you. I forget his name. All he does is just tell you how awful the Republicans are, how bad Trump is. He mocks them, makes fun of them. He does really well. He gets tons and tons of hits and subscribers. And if you watch Jimmy Dore, he's extremely popular too. And I actually like Dore more. But what Dore does is he mocks people often on the left, or at least Democrats, which I'm fine with most of the time. You know, AOC will tell you how they're not on your side. He's right. That said, he's also gone after some really good people like Greta Thunberg. He's such a cynic. He's such a misanthrope. He can't even acknowledge that there are some real progressives, really good people who are fighting the good fight. And again, he's a global warming denier. So that's part of the conspiracy capture of Jimmy Dore. So there are some shows, I think Brianna Joy Gray really does struggle with ideas and really try to come up with good solutions. I think sometimes she goes too far with that. I'd like to see her be more harshly critical of corrupt corporate Dems. You know, she a little bit less willing to, I think, condemn AOC than I am, for example. So there's a lot of different ideations of hosts. But I think what we do here is pretty unique, and it is grappling with ideas. It is promoting policy solutions that will make America a better place, while at the same time pointing out just how badly our leaders have failed us and continue to fail us, and how badly we're in need of an alternative to both parties, both the Republicrats and the Democrats. Is that fair to say? All right, folks, listen, enjoy your afternoon. If you're on East Coast time, if you're still west of, I guess, the Rockies? Is that where the mountain time zone starts somewhere? If you're west of the Rockies, enjoy the rest of your morning. I will be back tomorrow. We do have Jay Waxy, and we may even have, kind of exciting, we may have a caller from Gaza. We'll see if we can work that out. That is an effort, but I don't want to be too either optimistic about it or too specific about it. You'll see it if it happens. Enjoy your day.